After going through this video, you will be able to explain sessions, apply the concept of sessions in PHP. In the previous video, we discussed that to store non-critical information, we use cookies. And in this video, we will see how we can store critical information. Critical information can be anything like our password, bank account details, training progress, or anything similar that can cause serious damage to us if they are misused. As this information is crucial, this means it must be stored in a secure place. Now, in a communication channel, broadly we have a client and a server. We can't store critical information on the client side or the browser as it can be accessed by the user. However, when we talk about the servers, they are more secure because only the web server can access it using some code. This means we can store critical information on the server side. And here comes the concept of session into picture. Sessions are a small piece of information stored on the server, that is on the host computer, so that the web server through some code can access them but not the users. For example, let's say there are 4 users who are viewing a particular website. So for every user, the website creates a separate session that is user specific, and the data of that corresponding user is stored in their respective sessions. We can see for every individual user, the website has a separate user ID. Now, each session has a unique session ID through which these sessions can be accessed. It is these session IDs that are stored as cookies on the browser of each user. Suppose all these users have closed the website and they are no longer viewing it. So now, whenever one of these users visits the website again, the session ID which is stored as a cookie will go along with the HTTP request. That's how cookies work. And from the session ID, the host computer will fetch the corresponding session, and from that session, it will fetch the stored user ID, using which it can fetch other user related information from the database. Now you might think, if the session IDs are also stored on the browser of the user, how are they secure, as the user can still try to impersonate someone by editing the session ID stored in the cookie? Well, here in our example, the session IDs that we took are for understanding basis. In real life, the session IDs are actually very long alphanumeric strings, like for example this. So even if a user has access to his own session ID, the user won't be able to guess the session ID of another user. Next, we will look at how we can implement the concept of sessions in PHP. Similar to cookies, in PHP, we also have an inbuilt session start function for sessions. What happens when we call this function? It expects the browser to send a cookie with the name PHP sesh ID along with the HTTP request. And this PHP sesh ID contains a specific session ID. The function uses it to fetch the corresponding session and assigns whatever it contains to the $session superglobal variable. Using this $session variable, we can access information stored in the session like this. Now this was the case when the function was able to find the session ID. But there might be cases when it may fail to locate the PHP sesh ID. So let us look at such scenarios where it might happen. Firstly, it may be due to the fact that the user has visited the website for the first time. Hence, there is no cookie set on the user's browser for this website. Next, it may be because the user has deleted the cookie from the browser. Or it may be due to the reason that the user has edited the session ID stored in his cookie, which no longer matches with the session stored on the web server. Or the session stored on the server expired, or it has been deleted by the administrator. In such cases, when the session start function is not able to locate the PHP sesh ID cookie, for whichever mentioned reason, it will create a new session on the server and assign whatever it stores to the $session variable for it to be accessed by the PHP code. By default, this session is empty, and $session variable can be used to store any new information in the session. And as the response goes back, the corresponding session ID of the session is stored on the user's browser in the form of a cookie with the name PHP sesh ID. This also ensures that the next time when the user opens any web page on this website, a cookie with the name PHP sesh ID storing the session ID will definitely come along with the HTTP request. To summarize, session start function ensures to find a session corresponding to the user who is visiting the website and temporarily assigns it to the $session variable for us to access it. When session start function is called, $session is assigned and is ready to be used. If we try to use the $session variable without calling the session start function, it will throw an error. Note, for every request, $session stores different sessions based on the associated users. $session is like a temporary variable. The actual sessions are stored in the file system on the host computer. So, now it's time to put our knowledge of sessions into practice by implementing it in the login_submit PHP file. At the top of the file, first we call the session start function because it should be present before any output in the file. This will create the session for the current user if it does not exist already, or it will fetch the existing one. Next, we will access this session using the $session variable. So, inside the if condition, when the email and the password successfully matches, we will store the user ID and name inside this session like this. And this information gets stored in the session corresponding to that particular user, and this session is identified by the value of the cookie PHP sesh ID that comes along with the request. For another user, the PHP sesh ID value will be different. So, when the email and password matches, this code will store the user_ID and the name in the session corresponding to that user. The session start function by itself sets a cookie with the name PHP sesh ID that stores the session ID in the form of a long alphanumeric string. This means we don't need cookies explicitly anymore. So we will comment out these lines from our code. And now coming to the dashboard.php file, we will call the session_start function like this. This will fetch the same session which was earlier created for this user. We can then simply check the user_ID it has stored to identify the user using the $session variable. So if we now click on the click here hyperlink, it will take us to the dashboard page which prints the message that we wanted. Now that here we were able to print the message because the email and password matched successfully. Note that here we were able to print the message because the email and password matched successfully. Now let us look at the scenario when the email or password fails to match. So to demonstrate, let me enter an incorrect password. In such a case, the session is created for the user due to the session start function at the top. But the session remains empty as it would not get into the if condition where the initialization takes place. This means even if the session is created for the user, it does not mean that the user is logged in. A user is considered to be logged in only if we are able to identify the user with respect to our database. That is, in our case, if the session has user_ID set and has a valid value. Can you guess what would happen if we try to open the dashboard.php file? You may pause the video and think for a moment. As you might have guessed, it will throw an error because we are trying to access user_ID inside the $session variable, which is not even set. This infers that it is not ideal to directly access any value inside the session, and as a good practice, we should always first see if there is some value set inside the $session variable. And for this we have the $isSet function. This function ensures that the session has a user ID set and is not equal to null. Only then it will try to print the name. So in our dashboard.php file, we can use this function like this. This function returns the value as true if the user is logged in. Otherwise, it returns false when the user is logged out. And lastly, we have a session destroy function. This function allows us to delete the data of any session. And the reason we use this function is to make the user log out from his account. To use this function, we will create a logout.php file and will define the session start and session destroy function. Session destroy function deletes all the information we might have stored on the session, including the user_ID. So there is no way this user can then be identified the next time until the user logs in again. Can you tell why we have first defined the session start function and session destroy function later? This is because to destroy any session, we need to first fetch the session corresponding to that user, which is done by session start function. If we define the session destroy function first, the file will simply throw an error. That was all about PHP in this module. This module and particularly the last few topics are very crucial as you will be creating similar pages as part of your final project. So go through all the codes thoroughly, understand the logic, tweak the given codes by adding more information. All this will help you to become a good developer and be more confident. So up next is the quiz. All the best.